My name is Kendra, and I'm a 34-year-old art teacher from Boston who married into a wealthy family 3 years ago. Growing up with a single mum in a modest neighborhood didn't prepare me for the world of old money and social expectations that came with falling in love with James. His mother, Gwendolyn, made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for her precious son. But that night at Le Bistro changed everything. When she mocked me in front of everyone laughing at my lack of refinement, she had no idea what I was capable of. Let me tell you how my secret plan unfolded. If you're watching, drop a comment, letting me know where you're from, and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you. I met James at a charity art auction where I had donated a small watercolor painting. I never expected anyone to bid on it, much less the handsome man in the tailored suit who offered well above the asking price. When he approached me later that evening to discuss my artistic influences, I was instantly drawn to his genuine interest and warm smile. Despite our different backgrounds, we connected immediately over our shared love of Impressionist art and classic films. James came from a family that traced their wealth back 4 generations. The Harrisons owned multiple real estate developments across New England, and their name appeared regularly in the society pages. They lived in a sprawling colonial home in Beacon Hill, attended the right schools, and vacationed at the right destinations. James had followed the expected path, graduating from Harvard Business School before joining the family company, though he often confided that he would have preferred architecture. Our first date led to a second, and soon we were inseparable. James seemed refreshed by my straightforward nature and passion for teaching art to underprivileged kids. I fell for his kindness and the way he never made me feel inadequate, despite our different worlds. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed with his grandmother's vintage diamond ring. That's when I first met Gwendolyn Harrison. The moment James introduced me as his fiancée, I saw the subtle tightening of her perfectly lipsticked mouth, the quick assessment in her eyes. She took my hand in hers, adorned with an emerald the size of a small marble, and said, "How unexpected." James usually dates within our social circle. From that point on, her disapproval came in waves of carefully constructed criticism disguised as helpful advice. "Darling, perhaps you'd like the name of my personal shopper. Those department store clothes do nothing for your figure." Or, "I noticed you used the fish fork for your salad. I'd be happy to recommend an etiquette course." James seemed blind to his mother's behavior. When I mentioned her comments, he'd sigh and say, "That's just Mum's way. She means well." He'd grown up accepting her controlling nature as normal, never questioning the way she manipulated everyone around her with money and social standing. His father had passed away years ago, leaving Gwendolyn as the undisputed matriarch of the family. Wedding planning became a battlefield. I'd imagined a small, intimate ceremony in a garden. Gwendolyn had other plans: 300 guests at the Boston Harbor Hotel with ice sculptures and a 10-piece orchestra. Every decision I made was countered with, "But the Harrison family always." When I chose a simple lace dress, she arranged for 3 couture gowns to be delivered to our apartment. When I selected wildflowers for my bouquet, she called the florist to change the order to pristine white roses. For James's sake, I compromised more than I should have. The wedding ended up being grander than I wanted, but smaller than Gwendolyn demanded. Throughout the reception, she introduced me as James's bride, rather than by my name, telling anyone who would listen how she was helping the poor dear adjust to our world. After we returned from our honeymoon in Italy, Gwendolyn established a tradition of monthly family dinners at the most expensive restaurants in Boston. These gatherings became exercises in endurance for me. I would spend hours beforehand researching the restaurant's menu so I wouldn't mispronounce dishes, only to have Gwendolyn order in French or Italian for the entire table. I would carefully select an outfit only to feel underdressed compared to her designer ensembles. James noticed my anxiety before these dinners, but couldn't understand the depth of it. "They're just dinners, Kendra," he'd say. "Mum's trying to include you in family traditions." But inclusion felt more like a test I was set up to fail, a monthly reminder that I didn't belong in their world. As our first anniversary approached, Gwendolyn's behavior grew more blatant. What had started as subtle digs evolved into direct challenges to my place in James's life. The helpful gifts began arriving at our doorstep, books with titles like The Modern Lady's Guide to Social Graces and Etiquette for the Aspiring Socialite. Each came with a handwritten note. "Thought this might help you navigate some of your challenges, dear." During a Sunday brunch at her home, she corrected my table manners in front of James's cousins. "Kendra, darling, we don't reach across the table in this house. We ask someone to pass the item we need." Later that same day, she pulled out photo albums of James's childhood, filled with pictures of him alongside girls from suitable families she had always hoped he would marry. "This is Caroline Whitney," she would say, pointing to a blonde debutante. "Her family's bank has been managing Harrison assets for generations. She's a pediatric surgeon now." Such a shame she and James never connected romantically. The implication was clear. These women represented what she wanted for her son, and I was a disappointing deviation from the plan. James received a significant promotion at work around this time, taking over the development division of Harrison Properties. The new position came with more responsibilities and greater visibility within Boston's business community. Gwendolyn immediately stepped in, arranging business dinners and social events to help James network, though these gatherings seemed designed to minimize my presence or highlight my outsider status. Kendra teaches art to children. She would tell James's new business associates, her tone suggesting I ran finger painting sessions rather than structured classes on art history and technique. It's so important to have hobbies, don't you think? Especially when one's husband is building a legacy. Throughout this growing tension, James and I had been trying to start a family. After months of disappointment, I missed my period and took a home pregnancy test while James was at work. The 2 pink lines that appeared filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in months. I sat on the bathroom floor, hands trembling with excitement, already imagining our child's future. I decided to share the news with James that night and planned to announce it to the family at the upcoming dinner. Surely becoming a grandmother would soften Gwendolyn's heart toward me. This baby would be her legacy too, a continuation of the Harrison name she held so dear. With renewed hope, I spent an entire Saturday shopping for the perfect outfit for the dinner. I wanted to look elegant but comfortable, acknowledging my new status as an expectant mother without making the announcement obvious through my clothing choice. I settled on a classic navy blue dress with a slightly looser waistline, pairing it with pearl earrings James had given me for our anniversary. In the days leading up to the dinner, I researched appropriate ways to share pregnancy news in formal settings. I practiced small talk about current events and Boston society gossip so I could engage confidently with James's family. I even prepared a small toast announcing our news, rehearsing it in front of our bathroom mirror until the words flowed naturally. For the first time since marrying into the Harrison family, I approached a monthly dinner with excitement rather than dread. I truly believed that becoming a mother would finally earn me the respect Gwendolyn had withheld. This baby represented a new chapter for all of us, a chance to heal the rift between myself and my mother-in-law. How wrong I was. The restaurant Gwendolyn selected for that month's dinner was Le Petit Maison, an exclusive French establishment, where reservations were typically booked 3 months in advance. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, casting a warm glow over tables dressed in pristine white linens. Each place setting featured multiple forks, spoons, and knives arranged with mathematical precision. A single rose floated in a shallow crystal bowl at the center of each table. We arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, but Gwendolyn was already there, holding court with James's sister Amanda and her husband Thomas. She made her entrance from the bar to our table the moment we appeared, ear-kissing everyone's cheeks and saving a brief cold touch of her hand for my shoulder. "James, darling, you look exhausted. I've told you 1,000 times not to schedule morning meetings on family dinner days," she said, completely bypassing any greeting to me. "Come sit by me. I've arranged for Marcel to prepare that duck confit you adored last time." The seating arrangement, which I realized had been predetermined, placed James between his mother and sister, with me, relegated to the opposite side beside Thomas, and a place set for James's cousin Patrick, who was perpetually late. This strategic positioning ensured I couldn't easily participate in the main conversation without raising my voice across the table, something Gwendolyn knew I would never do in such a refined setting. The sommelier approached with the wine list, and Gwendolyn immediately engaged him in rapid French. I caught only fragments of their conversation, enough to understand she was discussing vintage preferences while making a comment about simpler palates, with a quick glance in my direction. The sommelier nodded sympathetically, and I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Kendra wouldn't know the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy anyway," she said in English loud enough for me to hear. "She grew up drinking whatever came in boxes, didn't you, dear?" Before I could respond, she turned back to the sommelier and continued their French conversation, effectively shutting me out. James frowned slightly but said nothing, reaching under the table to briefly squeeze my hand in silent support that felt wholly inadequate. As appetizers arrived, Gwendolyn dominated the conversation with stories about her recent charity gala, emphasizing connections with Boston's elite families and the substantial donations she had secured. Each anecdote seemed carefully chosen to reference people or events I couldn't possibly know, creating an invisible barrier between me and the rest of the table. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, my excitement about the pregnancy announcement now overshadowed by familiar anxiety. The crystal glass caught against my bread plate, tipping over before I could steady it. Water splashed across the immaculate tablecloth and onto Gwendolyn's silk sleeve. The table fell silent. Servers rushed over with extra napkins, but the damage was done. Gwendolyn looked down at her dampened sleeve, then up at me with cold eyes. "Well," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed restaurant, "I suppose we can take the girl out of the barn raising, but we can't take the barn raising out of the girl." She laughed, a tinkling sound that held no warmth, and looked around the table expectantly. Amanda chuckled nervously. Thomas smiled politely. Even James, my own husband, managed a tight smile while patting his mother's other dry sleeve apologetically. "Mom, it was just an accident," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Of course it was, darling," Gwendolyn replied. "Accidents happen when people find themselves out of their depth." I felt the stares from neighbouring tables, the subtle shifting of wealthy patrons, to better observe the unfolding drama. A flush crept up my neck to my cheeks as I dabbed uselessly at the spreading water stain with my napkin. "Actually," I began, trying to redirect the conversation to my prepared announcement, "James and I have some exciting news to share with everyone." But Gwendolyn wasn't finished. "Did I ever tell you all about the time the Vanderhilt family invited me to their summer estate?" she asked, effectively drowning out my words. "Now there's a family that understands tradition and proper breeding." The conversation swept away from me again, carrying my moment of joy along with it. I sat quietly through the main course, the special words I had rehearsed stuck in my throat, like the undercooked duck I couldn't bring myself to eat. When the dessert menus arrived, I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. In the elegant marble bathroom, I splashed cool water on my wrists and took deep breaths. The door swung open, and I heard Gwendolyn's voice before I saw her speaking to someone who must have followed her in. "The girl is absolutely hopeless, Margaret. James was always impulsive, but this marriage is his worst decision yet. Can you imagine her raising a Harrison? She would probably enroll the poor child in public school and dress them in clothes from a department store." I froze, hidden in the bathroom stall, as Gwendolyn continued, unaware of my presence. "The problem is, she simply doesn't understand our world, and never will. No amount of guidance from me seems to help. I've tried to be patient, truly I have. But tonight's little water incident is just one example of why she will never fit in." Her friend Margaret murmured something sympathetic, and Gwendolyn sighed dramatically. "I give it another year, too, at most. James will come to his senses eventually. The Harrison name has standards to uphold after all." They left the door swinging shut behind them, but their words remained echoing in the empty bathroom. I stood there, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach, a fierce new emotion rising through the humiliation and hurt. In that moment, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had my baby to think about, and I refused to let my child grow up watching their mother be belittled and dismissed. Something had to change, and I realized with sudden clarity that Gwendolyn would never change, which meant I would have to. The drive home passed in uncomfortable silence. James attempted small talk about the restaurant's renovation, carefully avoiding any mention of the water incident or his mother's behavior. I stared out the window at Boston's glittering nightscape, the weight of the unshared pregnancy news heavy on my heart. When we entered our apartment, I finally broke. "Are you going to say anything about what happened tonight?" James loosened his tie with a sigh. "Kendra, please. It was just a dinner. Just a dinner. Your mother humiliated me in front of everyone, and you sat there smiling like it was perfectly acceptable. What was I supposed to do? Create an even bigger scene?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You know how Mom is. She doesn't mean anything by it." "Doesn't mean anything by it," I repeated incredulously. "James, I overheard her in the bathroom telling her friend that I'll never fit into your world, that our marriage is your worst mistake, and that she expects you to come to your senses and leave me within a year or two." His face paled. "She wouldn't say that." "She did. And you know what hurts the most? Not her cruelty, but the fact that my own husband won't defend me against it." James slumped onto our sofa. "You don't understand the position I'm in. My mother has connections to everyone in Boston's business community. One word from her could affect my entire career. So your career matters more than your wife's dignity." The question hung in the air between us. "That's not fair. I'm trying to build something for us for our future." Mom controls a lot of the relationships I need. She's always been this way, Kendra. I've learned it's easier not to fight her. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity the pattern that would define our marriage if nothing changed. Years of dinners and holidays where I would be subtly demeaned while James looked away. A lifetime of compromises where I would always be the one bending until eventually I broke. "I'm pregnant," I said quietly. James's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What? When did you find out?" "Yesterday. I was going to tell everyone tonight at dinner, but your mother made sure I couldn't get a word in edgewise." He crossed the room and tried to take my hands, his face alight with joy that came too late. "Kendra, that's amazing news. We're going to be parents." I stepped back. "Yes, we are, which is why things need to change. I refuse to let our child grow up watching their mother be treated like this. If you won't stand up to Gwendolyn, then I will have to find my own way to handle the situation." That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, considering my options, the steady rhythm of James's breathing beside me offering no comfort. I could continue as I had been, constantly diminished and undermined. I could issue an ultimatum to James, forcing him to choose between his mother and me. I could even leave raising our child away from the toxic influence of Gwendolyn Harrison. None of these options felt right. I loved James despite his weakness regarding his mother. I didn't want to tear apart his family or deny our child their heritage. What I needed was a way to change the power dynamic without compromising my own integrity. The next morning, I called my best friend Zoe for coffee. We had been inseparable since college, and she remained my anchor in a world that often felt like quicksand beneath my feet. "She did what?" Zoe exclaimed after I recounted the restaurant disaster. And James just sat there. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, stirring my decaf absently. "For the baby's sake, I need to find a solution that doesn't involve constant warfare with Gwendolyn." Zoe was quiet for a moment, contemplating. "You know, before I started my graphic design business, I worked for this woman named Eleanor Voss. She's a cultural education consultant for wealthy clients, usually people who need to quickly learn about other cultures for business deals or international relocations. How does that help me? Eleanor's specialty is teaching people to navigate unfamiliar social territories with confidence. Many of her clients are newly wealthy individuals who need to learn old money etiquette fast." Zoe leaned forward, her eyes bright with an idea. "What if instead of trying to please Gwendolyn on her terms, you beat her at her own game?" The concept took root immediately. I wasn't interested in becoming a carbon copy of Boston's elite. But what if I could master the rules of their world while maintaining my authentic self? What if I could use Gwendolyn's weapons of social standing and connections against her, not to humiliate her, as she had done to me, but to establish myself as her equal? That afternoon, I met Eleanor Voss at her office in Back Bay. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and impeccable posture, she listened intently as I explained my situation. "Mrs. Harrison, I have worked with many women in positions similar to yours," she said when I finished. "The old money families of Boston can be particularly challenging to navigate. What you're describing isn't just about learning which fork to use. It's about understanding power dynamics in social settings." "Can you help me?" I asked. "I believe I can, but I need to be clear, my goal would never be to change who you are fundamentally. Rather, I would help you add new skills and knowledge to your existing personality. Think of it as learning a new language, not replacing your native tongue." We developed a 3-month plan. I would meet with Eleanor 3 times a week for intensive training in art history, wine appreciation, social etiquette, and Boston's complex web of old family connections. Between sessions, I would have assignments visiting museums, attending small cultural events, reading specific books on art and history. I told James I needed time for personal development after the restaurant incident, framing it as self-care rather than strategic preparation. He seemed relieved that I wasn't pressing him further about his mother, and supported my new interests without asking too many questions. For the first time since meeting Gwendolyn, I felt a sense of purpose and control. This wasn't about revenge, it was about claiming my place in a world that had tried to exclude me. As I left Eleanor's office that day, I placed a protective hand over my stomach and made a silent promise to my unborn child. Things would be different by the time they arrived. The next 3 months transformed my understanding of the world I had married into. Eleanor proved to be exactly what I needed. Part teacher, part coach, and part therapist. Our sessions took place in museums, wine cellars, historic homes, and once even on a yacht belonging to one of her former clients. Art is a language of power, Eleanor told me during our first session at the Museum of Fine Arts. For centuries, the elite have used art knowledge as a social marker. It's not enough to know the difference between Monet and Manet. You must understand why one was revolutionary and how the other influenced an entire movement. As an art teacher, I already had a solid foundation, but Eleanor helped me understand how to leverage that knowledge in social settings. I learned to casually reference obscure artists that Gwendolyn would recognize but couldn't discuss in depth. I studied the provenance of famous works owned by Boston's old families, memorizing acquisition stories that were points of pride among the elite. Wine education was more challenging. Eleanor arranged private tastings with sommeliers who taught me to distinguish not just between varieties, but between vintages and regions. I learned the stories behind prestigious vineyards and practiced describing wine characteristics without sounding pretentious. Never show off your knowledge, Eleanor advised. The truly sophisticated reveal their expertise naturally through appreciation rather than declaration. The etiquette lessons went beyond which fork to use. Eleanor taught me the subtle social cues that I had been missing, how a slight tilt of the head could signal polite disagreement, how the positioning of a handbag could indicate openness to conversation or a desire for privacy, how to gracefully exit uncomfortable topics without causing offense. The most important rule, she emphasized repeatedly, is that true sophistication is about making others comfortable, not putting them down. Gwendolyn uses her knowledge to exclude. You will use yours to include. Between sessions with Eleanor, I practiced my new skills at small gallery openings and literary events. I deliberately avoided venues frequented by the Harrison family, choosing instead to build my confidence among strangers. With each successful interaction, my natural anxiety in formal settings diminished. James noticed the changes in me, but interpreted them as increased confidence from the pregnancy, which I had finally shared with him after our fight. He commented on my new reading material and the occasional wine tasting class on my calendar, but never connected these to any plan regarding his mother. "You seem different lately," he said one evening as I returned from a lecture on French Impressionism. "More, I don't know, settled," I smiled. "I'm finding my footing, that's all." As my knowledge grew, so did my network. Eleanor introduced me to several of her former clients who had successfully integrated into Boston's social circles. Through them, I met Martin Chen, an influential art critic who expressed genuine interest in my teaching philosophy and my own artwork. "You should consider a small gallery showing how," he suggested after viewing photos of my recent paintings. "Your perspective is fresh and your technique is surprisingly sophisticated." This chance encounter led to an unexpected opportunity when Martin offered to attend a showing of my work if I could arrange one. Within weeks, I secured space at a small but respected gallery in Cambridge, something I had never had the confidence to pursue before. Another fortuitous connection came through Eleanor's friend Sophia, who sat on the board of the Children's Art Foundation, a prestigious charity that Gwendolyn had tried unsuccessfully to join for years. When Sophia learned about my work teaching art to underprivileged children, she immediately invited me to their annual fundraiser. "We need voices like yours on our committees," she told me. "Someone who actually understands how art education impacts children's development." The most strategic relationship I cultivated was with Antoine Lefebvre, the owner of Le Petit Maison, the very restaurant where Gwendolyn had humiliated me. Eleanor had arranged an introduction, mentioning only that I was an art teacher, with a particular interest in the restaurant's collection of small impressionist works. Antoine and I connected immediately over our shared appreciation for Berthe Morisot, a female impressionist whose work hung in the restaurant's main dining room. What began as a conversation about brush techniques evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect. "You have a wonderful eye," Antoine said during my second visit to discuss the artwork. "Most guests never notice the subtle details in Morisot's work that you've identified." When I mentioned hosting a special family dinner to announce my pregnancy, Antoine offered the restaurant's exclusive private dining room, typically reserved for celebrities and dignitaries. "For a true art appreciator, it would be my pleasure," he insisted. "The room has our finest pieces, including a small Degas that I think you will love." By the end of 3 months, I had built a foundation of knowledge, confidence, and connections entirely separate from the Harrison family influence. I had secured a gallery showing with a respected critic attending. I had received an invitation to an exclusive charity event, and I had arranged for my next family dinner to take place in the private room of the very restaurant where I had once been mocked. The final piece of my plan required James's cooperation. One evening, as we prepared for bed, I broached the subject carefully. "I've arranged our next family dinner." I told him, "It's important to me that this one goes differently." James looked apprehensive. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I need you to promise that if your mother behaves inappropriately, you'll support me. Not just by squeezing my hand under the table, but by actually speaking up." He sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "Kendra, you know how complicated things are with Mom." "I do, and I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to stand beside me as my partner, as the father of our child." I placed his hand on my slightly rounded belly. "Just for this one dinner. Can you do that?" After a long moment, he nodded. "I'll try. I promise I'll try." It wasn't the wholehearted assurance I had hoped for, but it was progress. As the date of the dinner approached, I finalized every detail with meticulous care. The seating arrangement, the menu, the wine selection, even the background music. For once, I would be the one in control of a Harrison family gathering. The night before the dinner, I laid out my outfit, a perfectly tailored burgundy dress that complemented my pregnancy glow, paired with subtle gold jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother. No designer labels, no attempt to mimic Gwendolyn's style. I would face her as myself enhanced, but not fundamentally changed by my 3 months of preparation. As I fell asleep that night, I felt calm for the first time in months. Whatever happened at tomorrow's dinner, I had already achieved something valuable. I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth, independent of Gwendolyn's approval. The evening of the dinner arrived crisp and clear, with autumn leaves swirling along Commonwealth Avenue, as James and I pulled up to Le Petit Maison. I had arranged to arrive 30 minutes early to ensure everything was perfect. Antoine greeted me with European double kisses. "Kendra, you look radiant. The private dining room is prepared exactly as discussed." He escorted us personally through the main restaurant to a discreet door at the back, which opened to reveal an intimate space with just one large round table. The walls were adorned with museum-quality paintings, dramatically lit to showcase their beauty. Crystal stemware caught the light from a small chandelier, and the finest china gleamed against the cream-coloured tablecloth. "The Degas I mentioned is there." Antoine pointed to a small ballet scene. "And I've selected wines from the Loire Valley as you requested. The sommelier has been briefed on your specific preferences." James looked around in confusion. "How did you arrange all this? This room is impossible to book." I smiled. Antoine and I share an appreciation for Bert Morisot's brush techniques. Before James could question me further, Antoine's assistant appeared to announce that James's cousin Patrick had arrived. "Shall I begin directing your guests here?" "Yes, please," I replied with the calm confidence Eleanor had helped me cultivate. As family members began to arrive, their surprise at the private room was evident. Amanda and Thomas entered first, followed by Patrick and his new girlfriend. Each expressed amazement at the exclusive setting, asking James how he had managed such an arrangement. He redirected their questions to me, with growing curiosity in his eyes. When Gwendolyn finally swept in 15 minutes late, as was her custom, her momentary pause at the doorway betrayed her surprise. She recovered quickly, air-kissing her way around the table until she reached me. "What a quaint little room," she said, her eyes taking in the elegant surroundings that contradicted her dismissive words. "I wasn't aware Le Petit Maison had private dining available to new customers." "Antoine was kind enough to make an exception," I replied smoothly. "Please, I've arranged for you to sit here, where you can best appreciate the Renoir." As everyone settled into their seats, I noticed Gwendolyn's slight frown at finding herself not at the head of the table, but simply one member of our perfectly circular arrangement. There was no power position in a round table, a detail Eleanor had emphasized during our planning. When the sommelier approached, I spoke before Gwendolyn could take control. "Nous commencerons avec le Sancerre 2019, s'il vous plaît," I said in the French I had practiced diligently. "Et pour le plat principal, je pense que le Châteauneuf du Pape se mariera parfaitement." The sommelier nodded approvingly. "Excellent choices, madame. The minerality of the Sancerre will complement your first courses beautifully." Gwendolyn's eyebrows rose fractionally, her usual strategy of excluding me through French conversation effectively neutralized. As the wine was poured and appetizers arrived, I guided the conversation toward the restaurant's art collection, a subject I now knew intimately. "The small Degas behind you is actually quite special," I explained to the table. "It's from his early period before he focused exclusively on ballet scenes. Antoine told me it was acquired from a private collection in Paris that rarely sells its pieces." James's cousin Patrick turned to examine the painting with interest. "I never would have noticed. How did you learn about this?" "Art is my profession," I reminded him with a smile, though I've been expanding my knowledge beyond what I teach my students. Throughout the appetizer course, family members increasingly directed their questions to me instead of Gwendolyn. When Amanda mentioned an upcoming exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts, I shared insights about the featured artist that had the entire table engaged. Even Thomas, usually quiet during family gatherings, asked my opinion on a painting he was considering for his office. Gwendolyn attempted to redirect the conversation several times, bringing up her recent social engagements and charity work. The Winthrop's Gala last week was extraordinarily exclusive, she announced during a brief lull. Only the oldest families in Boston received invitations. Speaking of exclusive events, Amanda turned to me. James mentioned you've been invited to the Children's Art Foundation fundraiser. Isn't that the organization you've been trying to join for years, Mum? Gwendolyn's smile tightened. I support many children's charities. One can't possibly be involved with all of them. As the main course arrived, Antoine himself came to check on our table, approaching me directly. Kendra, I hope everything meets your expectations. I've instructed the chef to prepare the duck exactly as we discussed. Everything is perfect, Antoine, thank you, I replied warmly. I must tell you, he continued. Martin Chen called me earlier. He's looking forward to your gallery showing next month. He rarely attends new artist exhibitions, so this is quite a coup for you. Gwendolyn's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Martin Chen, the critic? Antoine nodded. Yes, he and Kendra share some fascinating theories about modern interpretations of Impressionist techniques. Now please enjoy your meal. The dessert you selected will be ready in about 30 minutes. As Antoine departed, I could feel Gwendolyn's calculating gaze. Her attempts to reassert control became increasingly desperate, name-dropping acquaintances and referencing exclusive social events. But with each attempt, I responded by graciously including her in the conversation rather than competing with her. That sounds fascinating, Gwendolyn, I would say. It reminds me of what you were saying earlier about the Winthrop Gala. I'd love to hear more about the historical significance of these Boston traditions. By acknowledging her comments while redirecting them to include others, I demonstrated the principle Eleanor had emphasized: true sophistication brings people together rather than creating divisions. As dessert was about to be served, I gently tapped my water glass with a spoon. Before we continue, James and I have some news we'd like to share with everyone. The table quieted, all eyes turning toward us. I reached for James's hand and he squeezed mine supportively. We're expecting a baby, I announced, my free hand resting lightly on my small bump. And there's more. I've recently been informed that my artwork will be featured in next month's issue of New England Arts magazine, alongside their coverage of my first gallery showing. Exclamations of congratulations erupted from around the table. Amanda rushed to hug me while Patrick raised his glass in a toast. The combined announcement of both personal and professional news created exactly the impact I had hoped for, a moment of genuine celebration that even Gwendolyn couldn't diminish. Well, she said, when the excitement had somewhat subsided, I suppose pregnancy explains the noticeable changes in your figure recently. Let's hope the child inherits the Harrison features. The table fell silent at the thinly veiled insult. For a moment, I thought my carefully orchestrated evening would end as so many family gatherings had before, with Gwendolyn's cutting remark hanging in the air unchallenged. Then James cleared his throat. Actually, Mom, I hope our child has Kendra's features. Her creativity, her compassion, and her strength are exactly what the Harrison family needs more of. Gwendolyn's mouth opened and closed without sound, her shock at her son's rebuke evident. The rest of the table seemed equally stunned by James's unprecedented stand. To Kendra and James, Thomas said quickly, raising his glass to break the tension, and to the newest Harrison. As dessert was served, the conversation naturally separated into smaller discussions. Amanda engaged me about pregnancy, while Patrick asked James about names they were considering. Gwendolyn sat uncharacteristically quiet, her dessert largely untouched. When she excused herself early, claiming a migraine, I walked her to the door of the private dining room. Thank you for coming, Gwendolyn. It meant a lot to have family together for our announcement. She regarded me with new eyes, calculation replacing the usual dismissal. You've changed, she said simply. Not really, I replied. I'm just more comfortable being myself now. As the evening wound down, family members departed with warm embraces and genuine congratulations, both for the baby and for my upcoming gallery showing. Several promised to attend the exhibition, including Amanda and Thomas, who had never shown interest in my art before. When only James and I remained, Antoine returned with 2 glasses of sparkling water. A celebration for the parents-to-be, he said with a wink. Kendra, the evening was a great success, I think. After Antoine left us alone, James took my hand across the table. That was incredible. I've never seen my family act that way at a dinner, and I've certainly never seen anyone handle my mother like you did tonight. I didn't handle her, I corrected gently. I just refused to be handled by her. And that thing about Martin Chen in the art magazine, when did all this happen? I smiled. I've been busy while you've been at work. There's more to me than being James Harrison's wife, you know. He studied my face with new appreciation. I'm beginning to see that, and I'm sorry it took me so long. Okay. He paused, then added softly, I'm also sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. As we walked out of the restaurant, hand in hand, I felt a profound shift in our relationship. This wasn't just about winning a round against Gwendolyn or impressing James's family. It was about establishing who I was and would continue to be in this marriage, a partner, not a possession, an equal, not an accessory. The cool autumn air felt like a new beginning as we stepped onto the sidewalk. For the first time since our wedding, I felt truly hopeful about our future as a family, including whatever complicated relationship might evolve between me and my mother-in-law. In the weeks following the dinner at Le Petit Maison, subtle but significant changes rippled through the Harrison family dynamics. James began consulting me on business decisions, valuing my perspective in a way he never had before. Amanda called regularly, our conversations evolving from polite small talk to genuine sisterly exchanges. Even Thomas, who had always been cordial but distant, invited me to lunch to discuss art for his office renovation project. James demonstrated a new willingness to establish boundaries with his mother. When Gwendolyn attempted to plan our baby's nursery without consulting us, he firmly declined her offer. When she pressed him about attending a business dinner that conflicted with my first prenatal appointment, he prioritized our appointment without hesitation. I should have done this years ago, he admitted after ending a phone call with his mother, where he had for the first time said no to one of her demands. I didn't realize how much her control was affecting our marriage until I saw how you handled yourself at that dinner. My gallery showing took place on a snowy evening in December, the small Cambridge space filled with an eclectic mix of my students, fellow teachers, and to my surprise, several members of Boston's art community. Martin Chen arrived as promised, spending nearly an hour examining my work and engaging me in thoughtful conversation about my influences and techniques. James's family attended as well, with the notable exception of Gwendolyn. Amanda brought a small group of her friends who expressed genuine interest in my paintings. 2 of my pieces sold that night, one to Thomas for his office and another to a collector Martin had invited. As predicted, the showing received a positive mention in New England Arts magazine, with Martin praising my fresh perspective on traditional techniques and authentic emotional resonance. I framed the article and hung it in our home office, a tangible reminder of my growing professional identity separate from the Harrison name. Throughout these positive developments, Gwendolyn remained conspicuously absent from family gatherings. She declined Amanda's Thanksgiving invitation when she learned we would be attending. She sent her regrets for Christmas dinner, opting instead for a cruise with friends. Her avoidance strategy was obvious, but brought no satisfaction. Despite the outward success of my plan, I found myself increasingly troubled by the state of things. Yes, I had gained respect from James's family. Yes, I had established my independence and advanced my art career. Yes, I had even managed to shift the power dynamic with Gwendolyn. But these victories felt hollow, without resolution. As my pregnancy progressed and our child's arrival drew nearer, I became convinced that I needed to address the situation directly. Not for Gwendolyn's sake, but for my own peace of mind and for the health of our growing family. On a quiet January morning, I called Gwendolyn and asked to meet her for coffee, just the 2 of us. Her surprise was evident even over the phone, but after a brief hesitation, she agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory, away from the formal restaurants that had been the setting for so many tense encounters. When I arrived, Gwendolyn was already seated at a corner table, elegant as always, in a camel hair coat and pearls that probably cost more than my first car. "Thank you for coming," I said, settling into the chair across from her, my 7-month pregnant belly making the maneuver somewhat awkward. "I was curious about your invitation," she replied, her eyes taking in my changed appearance. "You're looking well." We ordered tea for her and decaf coffee for me, the mundane exchange giving us both a moment to adjust to this unprecedented one-on-one meeting. When our beverages arrived, I decided to begin with honesty. "I wanted to talk to you because this situation between us isn't sustainable, especially with the baby coming. Gwendolyn stirred her tea precisely 3 times before responding. What situation might that be? The one where you avoid family gatherings because I'll be there. The one where your son feels torn between his mother and his wife. The one where we're headed for years of tension that will ultimately affect your grandchild. Her perfectly manicured hand paused teacup halfway to her lips. You're very direct. I think we're beyond social niceties at this point, don't you? She set her cup down carefully. Very well. What exactly do you propose? I took a deep breath. I want to be clear about how your behavior has affected me. Since the day we met, you've made me feel unwelcome and inadequate. The night at Le Petit Maison, when you mocked me in front of everyone, was just the most public example. Gwendolyn's face remained impassive, but a slight tightening around her eyes suggested my words had landed. I need you to understand that I won't accept that treatment anymore, not for myself, and certainly not in front of my child. I don't expect us to become best friends, but I do expect basic respect. And the dinner? She asked. Your sudden connections with Antoine and Martin Chen, was that all some elaborate scheme to earn my respect? No, I said truthfully. It was about earning my own respect back. About reminding myself that I have value independent of the Harrison name or your approval. For a long moment, Gwendolyn simply looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then surprisingly, the corners of her mouth turned up slightly. You know, when James brought home girls before you, they would try so hard to please me. Designer clothes they could barely afford, opinions carefully aligned with mine, constant deference. It was all so predictable. She took another sip of tea before continuing. You were different from the start. Unpolished, yes, but authentic. I thought you would never fit into our world. A pause. I underestimated your adaptability. Yes, it wasn't quite an apology, but from Gwendolyn, this acknowledgement was significant. I don't want to adapt to a world where people use social status to hurt others, I told her, but I'm willing to learn the rules so I can change the game. And you've done that quite effectively. For the first time, there was a hint of genuine respect in her tone, though I notice you haven't used your new connections to exclude me, as I perhaps would have done in your position. That's not who I am? Gwendolyn nodded slowly. No, I suppose it isn't. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not resolving decades of her ingrained behaviours, or healing all the wounds of the past 3 years, but establishing a framework for moving forward. She didn't offer the full apology I might have wanted, but she did acknowledge that certain comments had been perhaps unnecessarily pointed. Give me a sense. In return, I promised her to include her in preparations for the baby's arrival, though with clear boundaries about final decisions remaining with James and me. We agreed to resume family dinners alternating between her preferred formal restaurants and more casual venues I would select. As we prepared to leave, Gwendolyn hesitated, then said, You should know that my own mother-in-law made my first years of marriage quite difficult. Harrison women have expectations about who joins the family. It was the closest she would come to explaining her behaviour, this glimpse of a younger Gwendolyn facing the same judgment she had later inflicted on me. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them as part of a larger pattern that I now had the opportunity to break. Your grandchild won't continue that tradition, I told her, one hand resting on my belly. They'll learn that family means support, not scrutiny. We parted with no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embraces, but with a tentative truce that felt like the beginning of something workable, if not warm. The true turning point in our relationship came 2 months later when my daughter Audrey came into the world after 20 hours of labour. James had called his mother from the hospital more out of obligation than expectation, and to our mutual surprise, Gwendolyn arrived within the hour. She entered the room hesitantly, her usual confidence momentarily suspended as she approached the bassinet, where Audrey lay swaddled in a hospital blanket. May I? She asked, a vulnerability in her voice I had never heard before. I nodded, and Gwendolyn carefully lifted Audrey, cradling her with unexpected tenderness. As she gazed down at her first grandchild, something in her composed facade cracked. A single tear tracked down her cheek, leaving a faint line in her perfect makeup. She has the Harrison chin, Gwendolyn whispered, then looked up at me with the ghost of a smile. But your eyes, I think, strong and perceptive. In that moment, with her designer suit rumpled from Audrey's tiny form pressed against her, Gwendolyn appeared simply as a grandmother meeting her granddaughter, all social pretenses temporarily stripped away by the primal connection of family. The months that followed brought a gradual thawing between us. Gwendolyn still had moments of overstepping and critical comments, but they came less frequently and with less sting. For my part, I guess I maintained the boundaries I had established while acknowledging her genuine love for Audrey. My art career continued to develop alongside motherhood, with a second, more successful showing 6 months after Audrey's birth. James found his voice not just with his mother, but in his career, proposing a new division of Harrison Properties focused on arts-centered community development. As for the knowledge and connections I had gained through Eleanor's training, I incorporated them naturally into my life, without using them as weapons or shields. I maintained my friendship with Antoine, my professional relationship with Martin Chen, and my involvement with the Children's Art Foundation, all of which enriched my life independently of any strategy regarding Gwendolyn. 1 year after that fateful dinner at Le Petit Maison, we celebrated Audrey's baptism with a family gathering at our home. As I watched Gwendolyn helping Amanda arrange flowers, while James's cousin Patrick entertained Audrey, I reflected on how far we had all come. The revenge I had once craved against my mother-in-law had evolved into something far more valuable: genuine empowerment and the breaking of a cycle of generational conflict. By refusing to be either a doormat or a mirror image of Gwendolyn's tactics, I had changed the rules of engagement for our entire family. Later that evening, as James and I put Audrey to bed, he commented on the relative peace that had settled over our extended family. "I never thought I'd see my mother voluntarily help with dishes in someone else's home," he marveled. "You've accomplished the impossible." "Not impossible," I corrected him, gazing down at our sleeping daughter. "Just difficult, and worth it." The true victory wasn't in humiliating Gwendolyn or proving my superiority. It was in creating a family environment where Audrey would grow up seeing healthy relationships, clear boundaries, and adults who could disagree without diminishing each other. As we stood there watching our daughter sleep, I thought about the many lessons I would one day share with her. How to stand up for herself without losing her kindness. How to be confident without needing to make others feel small. How true power comes not from controlling others, but from knowing your own worth. These were the gifts that had emerged from that painful night at the restaurant, transformed through determination and growth into something beautiful and lasting. Not revenge, but renewal. Not triumph over another, but the discovery of strength within myself. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? How did you handle it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to remember their own worth today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the best response to those who try to diminish you is simply to grow beyond their reach.